A recent Utah Utes commit who was a 4-star just got upgraded to a 5-star by a major recruiting site, and the voice of the BYU Cougars, Wrubell, kind enough to join Locked On Utes today to talk about what makes the Utah-BYU rivalry unlike anything else. We're going to discuss on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time tuning into our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 of bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. My name is JT Wistrcill, and on today's Locked On Utes, where we talk about a major recruiting shift that go in Utah's favor. And as I mentioned too, Wrubell, the voice of the BYU Cougars, joins me to talk about what makes this rivalry special, his favorite memories and moments from it, and what this rivalry looks like moving forward, especially obviously the uncertainty of quarterback for BYU. We get into that in the second segment and talk about some of the things he mentioned in the third. But first, let's start with a nice little recruiting news. We haven't talked about recruiting in a little bit. Utah had a great June in recruiting, and we've been on the Big 12 media days, and lots of other news has come out since. But some news that comes out does relate back to recruiting, and that is that Utah Utes commit a offensive lineman, and Kelvin Obot was upgraded from a 4-star to a 5-star by Rivals. He was ranked now the 7th player in Rivals class of 2026 and was moved to a 5-star prospect. And the offensive lineman from Idaho is the best player that Utah's landed so far in this class. They've landed some really good receivers like the Pula twins, but Kelvin Obot's he's a different breed, honestly. I mean, 6'5", 265 pounds. Like, he's a 62nd ranked player according to 24/7 Sports, the 6th ranked offensive tackle. He's a 94th ranked player, 94 player rating on 24/7 Sports. But so 24/7 still has him as a 4-star, but Rivals has him as a 5-star. And once again, the 7th best player in the country. That is massive for Obot especially, but also for the Utah Utes. The fact that they are able to land one of the best players by what everyone would agree is a top 3 recruiting site in Rivals, 24/7 Sports, Rivals, On 3 and Rivals have now merged, I guess, too. So, but whatever way you slice your recruiting rankings, like Rivals is right up there. So they got some of the best talent evaluators, and they looked at the Utah Utes' new offensive lineman and said, that's a 5-star. That's big for Utah because this is a Utah team that hasn't landed 5-star talent ever. Their best recruit in program history is Clark Phillips all time. Clark Phillips was a 96 composite rating. He was the 51st ranked player in his class, 6th at his position. Then you scroll down and you look. Right now, Obot is the 7th best player, according to 24/7 Sports, that Utah has ever landed. Right in front of him is Spencer Fano, and right behind him is Caleb Lomu. By the way, recruiting rankings are so hard, like to find which guys are going to hit, and then development and all those things happen. Caleb Lomu was rated the 164th best player in his class. If they redid those rankings, he'd be a lot higher. Spencer Fano was rated the 42nd best player in that same class. They did those rankings, it'd be a lot higher. Both Fano and Lomu, as of right now in that class, I mean, they're both top 10 offensive linemen. Honestly, right now, they're both top 5 offensive linemen if you look at the majority of a draft sites, as we talked about earlier in the week. So it's just massive that Utah has had the success they have with those guys, because the success that they've had with those guys is now helping them have success on the recruiting trail. You got a 4-star in Ike Garcia, who's just kind of waiting and buying his time. I think he's going to be one of the team's starting tackles this season from now. You get another guy in Obot, who is going to have a chance to come in and start right away. And we can talk about if Obot's a 4-star now in a moment, a 4-star, 5-star, like what do I think he is in a moment. But either way, like this Utah team, and Jim Harding especially, deserves a huge round of applause for the job they've done recruiting, developing, and just finding the right guys too. And credit to those players as well, obviously, for buying in the Fanos and Lomus, for getting it done. But if it wasn't for Utah's success, this obviously isn't just Spencer Fano, Caleb Lomu. Utah was able to land them in part because of they won back-to-back Pac-12 titles. But you see Utah offensive linemen going to the NFL. Satala Laumea, 1 point of guard, then makes it to the NFL and gets an opportunity there. Braden Daniels, another guy who was a guard and got to make it to the NFL. So what did Utah present guys like Fano and Lomu an opportunity to come and play early, especially for Fano, but Lomu playing in year 2 is still impressive. And those guys have obviously, there's no experience like game experience. So wherever you can go to play, I do think your freshman year, like most guys, it does help them to redshirt, because it's just really hard to play at that strength in year 1. That's why Spencer Fano, like he was doing really good for a freshman offensive lineman, but it was like, oh, if you're just like, is is he one of the best offensive linemen in college football after his freshman year? You would say no. But look at him after his sophomore year. You're like, that might be the best offensive lineman in college football. Like, that's how good Spencer Fano is. A lot of sites have called him the best offensive lineman in college football. And that's because, in part, he was able to play right away. And in part, also just because he got up to the strength and got stronger. So it's been fun to watch him see those guys grow. And it's going to be fun to watch see Obot grow. You never know in today's recruiting era, like if a guy will stay or go or not. And I've never met Obot personally, so I don't know like what's going to happen there. But I do feel like he's going to stay at Utah. And I think it's a really attractive situation for him because he can come and play right away and get some of the best offensive line coaching in the country. As for, is he 5-star talent? I do feel like he is. I think he's worthy of this. And I think 24/7 could bump him up too. When I watch Kelvin Obot and another recent 5-star, Felix Ojo, who did visit Utah, but actually ended up committing to Texas Tech, if we're going to look at the comparisons between the two, 6'5" for Obot, 6'6" for Ojo, 275 for Ojo, and Obot at 265. Ojo is the 6th-ranked player in the nation, according to 24/7 Sports, and number 1 offensive tackle, and Obot is the 6th-ranked offensive tackle. So not far behind, but they do give Ojo the slight edge. And, you know, when you turn on the tape, maybe you lean slightly Ojo, but I don't know. I think it's close. I mean, Obot is a fantastic athlete. He's got good technique. He's incredibly strong, plays with good pad level. Like, I already mentioned the athleticism. But that's one thing every time you turn on the tape, you're like, look how well and easily he moves. Offensive linemen, or just people that big aren't supposed to move that easy, and Obot absolutely does. Ojo's another guy who does that too. But I wouldn't be surprised at all. Like, best of luck to Ojo at Tech. I wouldn't be surprised at all if by the time this all winds down, right, we're saying that Obot is the better lineman of the two. And that sounds like, oh, that's going to be crazy. What are you talking about? This guy's ranked higher. But we just talked about, like, how many other offensive linemen are ranked ahead of Spencer Fano in the class of 23 at the time. And now we're fast forwarding here and we're about to have the 26th draft. And Spencer Fano is going to go a lot higher than a lot of those guys. So recruiting rankings are one thing, but it also matters what you do once you get to college, how you grow, develop, and commit yourself. And Spencer Fano's done exactly that. And Obot's going to have a chance to do that too. And whenever you land 1 5-star, if you can win and have success, and also just continue to have that track record of like, hey, come to Utah, play, develop, and then we can take you to the next level. Like, Utah should continue to land elite offensive linemen. Right now, because of the success they've had with Spencer Fano in particular, but Caleb Lomu right up there, I think offensive line, we're going to see a run continue for Utah on offensive linemen. That's how massive the Spencer Fano commit was. And Utah needs to continue to win in order to do that too. But I do expect them to bounce back this season, obviously. But we know Utah can get really good offensive linemen. They can continue to get good secondary players at any time. And linebacker, I'd say, is still another one, especially if Lander has a big year. But let's not forget, like Cyrus Polu, Christian Thatcher. I think Polu is a 4-star and Thatcher was, but got dropped down. So borderline 4-star guys. Now, if you're Utah, they have a quarterback in the class of 2027. Thatcher, we just mentioned Christian Thatcher, his brother, I think it's Thaddeus Thatcher, I want to say. He's committed to Utah as a 4-star QB. So if you start to have success with some of those guys at positions, landing high talent, 4 stars, and helping them grow, succeed, make the NFL, honestly, it's whatever positions, because at the time, one of the reasons that Utah got Lander, I feel like, right, is look what they did with Devin Lloyd, helping him grow and become the player that ended up being a first-round NFL draft pick. Same thing with Utah tight end for a while, where they were able to get Landon King. I know that didn't work out, but that was a really good transfer get for Utah at the time. And you're able to land a guy like that because of what you did with Dalton Kincaid and Brant Keithy. Now the tight end position the last few years, you're not just because you changed the offense, but you're not going to get as good players when the production isn't there as much. So a massive win for Utah to be able to recruit and develop at the level they have, and has allowed them to get players that in the past they haven't been able to land, like 5 stars. Kelvin Obot, 5-star offensive lineman, according to Rivals, committed to the University of Utah. 5-star in Utah hasn't gone in the same sentence a lot. I really like that it is. And good for Obot getting ranked there, and it's great for Utah too. And, you know, speaking of what's great for Utah, is football season's right around the corner, and right after that, it won't be long until we get the rivalry game. The voice of the BYU Cougars, Greg Wrubell, kind enough to join me on Locked On Utes at Big 12 Media Day. We talked about this rivalry and a wide range of topics relating to all things Utah-BYU, including what BYU does at quarterback leading into the season and how it's going to affect the game against Utah. All that and more coming up after this. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the place for you. With FanDuel, you can just make it's the best way to just make the game even more exciting. I mean, you're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get it on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and the app keeps it fresh with new daily promotions and fun ways to bet. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. New to FanDuel, new customers can get just $5 to spend just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. You can head over to FanDuel today. JT Wistrcill of Locked On Utes here live with Greg Wrubell, voice of the BYU Cougars. Utah-BYU, you've been in this rivalry for a long time now. What makes this rivalry special?
Proximity, culture, history, animosity, equality in terms of competition. A lot of great elements to it. They were separated for about a decade from in different conferences. That took away from it a little bit. Now they're back together. The games have even more impact now that they're Big 12 games. So it's been a rivalry that's seen different phases over time, and I think is on its resurgence right now.
I would absolutely agree with that. I was going to say, just you speak of animosity. I mean, when you have players who are going from Utah to BYU more than ever, there was various reports of tampering. We don't need to get into that as much, but just obviously it feels like the animosity has been raised amongst the fan base. Do you feel like it's at an all-time high, and do you feel like the anticipation to this year's game is maybe even at an all-time high?
Well, it used to be BYU and Utah was going to be the last game of the year every year. And then Utah separated to the Pac-12, and the game actually went away for a few years. Certainly it wasn't always on the end. It didn't end up in the last Saturday in November anymore. So that part of it changed. I think, and even though it's not back at the last week of the year, it's in mid-October right now, I still think there's a lot of anticipation for it. I don't know if it's at an all-time high yet, but I think with BYU now, in a power conference status, which they didn't have, for a number of years, I think it's kind of raised the ante a little bit. I think Utah rightfully took advantage of its opportunity to kind of widen a bit of a gap while it was Pac-12 and BYU was independent. But now that BYU has the same or better resources, I think we're going to see now, I think an uptick in the intensity, I think because the stakes are raised.
Absolutely agree with that too. And, part of things make the stakes raised as well is just the fact that, like you said, they're in the same conference now, get to play frequently. They don't play rivalry weekend, though, especially being the man who gets to call this game. Do you wish they played the last week of the regular season, or do you like the almost Red River rivalry approach of trying to give this week and make it its own thing and not get swallowed up by maybe Ohio State, Michigan, some of the other big rivals?
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm in the minority on this. I'm not too wound up about the fact that they don't play on the last weekend of the year. I'm okay with it being where it is in mid-October. In fact, I think in a lot of ways, it helps to, in some ways, get it out of the way before the stretch run. I think if you have everything riding on that last weekend of the year, and you're playing for the stakes that now include a Big 12 championship game or qualifying for the college football playoff, it's almost not that it's too much to handle, but I'd be okay to not have that in addition to everything else being on the line, if that makes sense. So I'm okay where it is in mid-October, and I think it is okay to kind of shine a light at that part of the season on BYU and Utah. I'm all right with it.
How do you feel about the other BYU quarterback options? I got to call McKay Hillstead's games in high school. I've always been a big fan of his game, but do you think he's ready, as well as the other quarterback options, to step up with Jake Retzloff now leaving the program?
I'm excited for the competition. I think August quarterback battles are great when they exist, and BYU hasn't had one for a little bit. So McKay Hillstead and Trayson Bourget and Bear Bachmeier, three really good options right now. And I think it would be a lot to ask from a true freshman to come in and grab that job in Bachmeier, but he's got certainly all the tools and talents to be that guy eventually. I think that it's asking a lot of a true. So it's so rare that a true freshman starts week one for a high level, power conference program. So I think he'd have to be exceptional. I'm not saying he can't be. He might be that kind of player in August. But Hillstead and Bourget, have the most Division I reps. They've each started Division I games. I anticipate a fun battle and truly an intriguing one because they're kind of starting from scratch. I mean, Aaron Roderick and Kalani Sitake, they've seen these guys. They know a bit about them. But in terms of 4 weeks of every pass being charted and really competing, it's going to be intense.
It's going to be incredibly intense. The game will be back in Provo this year after being in Salt Lake this year. What are those atmospheres like on game day? Does it feel different than the other games you get to call on the season overall? And what are maybe the differences when you're calling it in Provo versus in Rice-Eccles Stadium?
Yeah, I do think you feel a certain hum and buzz and vibration about the building on a BYU Utah game day, and whether it's in Salt Lake City or in Provo. It's interesting in my job. I'm a little bit insulated, at Rice Eccles or at LaVell Edwards Stadium. You're in the enclosed glass booth. You're so high above the fray. You don't necessarily, get the palpable sense, play in, play out, because you're kind of insulated. But with the beauty of crowd mics and the visuals themselves laying out before you, I have no trouble sensing the atmosphere. And I think it's kind of equal. You get more people in the building in Provo for sure. I think maybe one of the loudest, most stadium shaking experiences came in a BYU Utah game in 2001 when Luke Staley scored a game-winning touchdown on an option pitch down the far sideline. And I was one of those games and moments where I truly felt the vibration of the building at that moment. And so some of the most exciting moments I've had as a play-by-play guy have been in BYU Utah games. This past game in 2024 with a last-second field goal to win the game. The game I mentioned a moment ago, 2006, back to Harleen in Salt Lake City. There have been some great ones.
Is there one that stands out? That was actually going to be my last question, and you took it there naturally, being the play-by-play guy, going to knowing how to lead the conversation through. So is there a game that stands out overall, or is it hard to pick just one?
I think 2006, back to Harleen, is a standout. It's zeros on the clock. It's John Beck scrambling around, forever trying to find a receiver, and Johnny Harleen comes open away from the play, and a ball that barely gets to a guy on his knees. There was so much about it that was kind of epic and poetic, and it was in Salt Lake, and you silenced the crowd, and that was when they were playing in the same conference, of course, and so a lot was on the line, and that one I think is kind of an all-timer. Yeah,
a lot on the line this year when the two teams meet up once again. Can't wait for it to happen. Greg, really appreciate you taking the time.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right, really kind of the voice of the BYU Cougars, Greg Wrubell, to come on and join me. And a lot of things he said were very interesting, I felt like, too. And I think one of the first ones is he just talked about the rivalry is on its resurgence, right? Rivalries are always going to be rivalries. But when you don't play each other, you do lose that sense of passion a little bit, because what keeps the fire of a rivalry burning, and the Utah-BYU one was always strong enough where it was going to, but what keeps the rivalry burning, anything burning, is new chapters. And when you're not playing each other, you're not writing new chapters. Well, now that Utah and BYU played each other last year, going to keep playing each other for the foreseeable future, you're getting chapters in. But you're not just getting chapters on the football field anymore. You're getting and not just on the recruiting trail either. These two schools obviously compete for the same recruits. What else are you competing for on the recruiting, not just the recruiting trail, but the transfer portal trail, where you have guys going from one roster to the other at a higher level? We had, we all made a big deal of Keanu Tanavasa was a big story. We have Carson Ryan now in the past, Francis Bernard, John Henry Daly, Logan Fano. So we see this now even more, this back and forth, where it just raises the extra level, especially just the way some of them played out. It's going to raise the just intensity of this rivalry. So I do believe the rivalry is on its resurgence, especially look at the way it ended last year. And then, Mark Harlan was very frustrated after the game. So that added another just layer to the storyline in general. So this is it's one of those things that I do feel like this rivalry is on a rise. I think the passion for it is at an all-time high because of some of the recruiting and transfer portal stuff. And the way it ended last year, BYU has been able to raise their level of play, obviously. Utah won, however, was it 9 in a row? And now BYU is able to be more of a force because of the strides they've made, in large part due to NIL and the natural era of college football, and they've landed some really good players. So this rivalry, I do feel like it's on its resurgence, especially for football too. And that was something that Greg mentioned as well, is the uptick in intensity, right? With the stakes raised at BYU getting up to this level. This is something where now that Utah and BYU are on equal footing again, we are going to see this rivalry be back and forth. I've said before on Locked On Utes, I think when we look at some of the recruits and players that BYU is landing in future seasons, especially, I'm just curious to see how often Utah goes into a season ranked higher than BYU, because BYU recruiting wise has put themselves on another level than Utah, landing a 5-star QB. They landed Keanu Tanavasa. We know what they did in basketball, but Utah is not going to be far behind. Like, they're going to be right there. So I am curious to see how often in these seasons, like, is Utah ahead of BYU on the season based on how things play out? I do think this year Utah is definitely going to be better than BYU because of the quarterback situation, as we've talked about. And honestly, I had BYU as a regression team anyways. Anytime you have a year like last year, it still takes some time to reap the benefits of that season that you have. So BYU is a really good year last year. They land some awesome recruits. Well, Ryder Burton ain't going to be up there till 2027? So it's still, you land some of the portal results, but not enough where it transforms you in this immediate season too. So I've had BYU, as I said, even before the Retzloff stuff, I had BYU kind of penciled as a drawback team, which I think Joe Klatt did as well. And I know he got BYU fans mad about that too. So that was funny. But yeah, the intensity is there and the level's been raised. It's an equal playing field. And it's been fun to watch and see now. And one thing you talked about too is one thing I thought was interesting that Greg spoke on was he's okay not having the rivalry game be on rivalry weekend, which I'm okay on. I'm grown more on it. I still don't love it. If it was up to me, it would be on rivalry weekend. I believe there is a vacuum at the last rivalry slot on the evening, whether that's, the main college football game in the country kicks off. ESPN wants the Iron Bowl at 7:30 or whatever. I would rather Utah-BYU be the one right after that. I think that Arizona State is the one the Big 12's kind of chosen in that spot. They try to put Utah-BYU in another weekend, but it just hasn't. It's harder to garner. It's just if you're on rivalry weekend, you get more of a spotlight as one of the major rivalries in the sport. But if you do it on a different weekend, it does get more eyeballs. I get that. And Greg made a good point when talking about, hey, if you've got the rivalry, the emotions attached to the rivalry game the last week of the season on top of like Big 12 championship implications, that's a lot to handle. So if you win that, you do risk emotional letdown the next week. I do totally agree with that sentiment. I think that is absolutely true that you do risk that emotional letdown when you get yourself so fired up and amped up for games of this level. So I thought that was there too. Obviously, Greg also talked with me about the intriguing BYU QB battle that they have going on. I think it's going to be McKay Hillstead right now, former Skyridge High School player for Utah High School out in Utah, Salt Lake City. Or not in Salt Lake City on that one. They're over in Lehigh more. But I'm just curious to see with BYU. Bear is over there as well. There's a lot of guys in that room. And I just don't think any of them are as good as Jake Retzloff. And I do think that we will see BYU take a step back, as I mentioned, because of it. Could BYU still be right there towards the top of the Big 12? Sure. I think it's a good roster, so I could see it. But I just don't think you lose your quarterback in July like that. And I know it happened earlier technically, but I don't think you lose your quarterback, the lack of experience, the way this team won some of their games last year. I just don't see them getting better. Like that's not something I see right now. So that's just something I feel like it'll be interesting to see who wins the QB battle, especially be interesting to see how those guys are playing, right? Like come the rivalry game, because October is a decent length away still. So there's time for those guys to get up to speed, and it'll be interesting to see how those guys are performing. And of course, whatever quarterback that is does get to play in his home venue rather than a ruckus Rice-Eccles Stadium atmosphere like last year they would have had to. So that is an advantage for BYU, but I still think this Utah defense will be playing in stride at this time, hitting on all cylinders, and I do think Utah wins the rivalry game and breaks the 2-year losing streak that they have. Speaking of just kind of the amped up rivalry stakes, right? Like that's another part of this is the fact that Utah's now lost a couple of years in a row. Last thing that Greg mentioned, he mentioned a lot of things. Once again, appreciate him for taking the time to come on, but he also talked about just feeling the buzz in the air and just genuinely the buzz in the stands, like shaking a little bit when you get this rivalry game played, whether it's at Lavelle Edwards or Rice-Eccles Stadium. And that's something I totally agree with. I've only experienced this rivalry game when it was at BYU, and that was my first ever sample. Unfortunately, that was Charlie Brewer won, and yeah, it didn't go well for Utah. And BYU stormed the field and everything after. But during the game, you could just feel that this just wasn't a normal college football game. You felt this is a rivalry game. This matters. Like even more, every game matters, but beating your rival matters a little bit more. And you felt that in the stands. You could feel how bad BYU wanted this win, hence why they rushed the field because it had been so long. You could feel Utah, the passion they were playing with and wanted to get it out. So it's not just a regular game. Players can say, oh, it's just another one as much as they want. But I totally agree with Greg. It's different. The buzz in the air, the passion, the noise, everything's a little amped up because it's a rivalry. And it is one of the best rivalries in the sport, despite what the Athletic may think, because they didn't include it in one of their top rivalries, which is crazy. We haven't even gotten a chance to really talk about that. Might do that on a future show, but it's just, y'all know it's one. I genuinely think it's a top 10 rivalry in college football, maybe even top 5. It doesn't get the hype that some of the other ones do. Sometimes just Utah gets overlooked, and that's wrong. And now I'm just talking about the state itself. So that way I'm appealing to BYU and Utah fans. I think we can all relate to that a little bit. Our high school football gets overlooked. Our football teams get overlooked. And I think this rivalry definitely gets overlooked at times. And that's a travesty because it's a really dang good one. And it's definitely special when these two teams come together. And I think it will be this year again. I just think it'll be special because Utah is going to get a nice win. As if we sit here right now, I'm feeling Utah by a touchdown. But I could see it being I think it'll be a good game going into the fourth. Would love to be wrong about that. in a Utah sense, of course, not a BYU sense blowing them out, but we'll see how that shakes out. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Utes. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you're in the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football has you covered. Spencer McLaughlin down at Big Ten Media Days, giving us all the latest on the Big Ten Conference. And tomorrow's show, we'll have Lander Barton's interview. Sorry I didn't get to put that out today, but that will be dropping tomorrow. Lander Barton joins me on Locked On Utes, talk about tight end and a few other things going on in the Utah football world. Thank you again for listening to this show, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow.